Welcome to this PinvoiceR training session. In this session, we're going to look at how you go about setting up a payroll so that it can be used for online timesheets. When you're logged into PinvoiceR, if you then click onto the Systems link and then on the Award Engine Editor link, and in some systems this would be called the Payroll Editor. If you click on there, you'll then see a list of existing payrolls set up in your system. Now the thing to understand is that these payrolls are used when you are using online timesheets, or if you're entering hours in an orders section and want to enter in the start time and finish time, etc., and then use a rule to interpret those hours. So the starting point for any rule is to understand the time zones, and you can have these set up as you wish, either as generic type of time zones that might apply to a group of clients, or something that might be quite specific to a particular client. So for example, we're going to create a new one here and just give it a brand new name. And here, for example, we might use one for the building industry. So if I just call it building and construction, for example. And the thing to understand is that within this menu, you're looking at how the timesheet would be considered depending on when somebody starts or finishes a shift, and whether that happens to be an early start, what we would call AM or normal hours, afternoon or PM hours, or a night shift. So really looking at those shift boundaries and saying, right, if something started between this time and that time, then what does it mean about how to interpret it corresponding to particular shifts. So here we're going to use an example where we want to say that a person working under this time zone can only work for 38 hours a week before overtime is considered. And then in terms of maximum days per week, you would typically put in 5. So these are sort of 5 ordinary days. And similarly for the next one, and again, it would depend on the rule that you want. What would you like as a minimum shift? So certain awards or EBAs have written in them that if somebody was called into work and then sent home straight away because there was no work, they would be paid a minimum number of hours. So for example, in this one we'll put 4. So if somebody came there for 5 minutes and went home, this interpretation or this time zone would give them 4 hours as a minimum, irrespective of the 5 minutes that they were actually there on the timesheet. In this particular example, I'm going to set up rules really for normal afternoon, also day, afternoon, and night shift. And so I'm going to say that, say, a shift that starts anywhere between, say, 7 AM and finishes, let's say, at 1 o'clock, so basically starts anywhere between that, is considered day shift, hypothetically. So this is just using an example of here. And so I might, to be exact, I might say I want to finish it at 12:59, so that I'm not running into the situation that a particular timesheet might have someone start on afternoon at 1 o'clock and finish their shift at a similar sort of time, and not easily be able to understand which one of those day or afternoon shifts that falls in. So the next one I would say would be going from 1300 to say 1800, for example, as starts between, and then I might say I want to go from 1801, just to be sort of pedantic on that, and finish at say 6:59. So you can see with the spread of hours that I've applied here that with all of these starts between, it's looked at any particular option in a span of 24 hours and put those in as a range of either day, afternoon or night shift. From there, we need to set up a rule group. So if we create a rule group, and just to, again, I can call it whatever I wish to, I'm going to go add rule group, and I'm going to call it building construction. And here is where, if I wish to, just from a label point of view, link to a label of a particular award. So, and what I'm doing here, I don't happen to have that in this list, and that's maintained separately. But if that was important from a labeling point of view, you would add that to your list of awards and before getting to this point. So I'll just leave it as a default agreement. And then I'm going to pick the time zone that this group applies to. So when I add the group, I then have my group name, and it can show me what the time zone is there. So if I now click on that, the next thing that I want to do is to add, and basically it's a job. So you can have obviously any number of jobs within this rule group, and each one could be slightly different, but in the main you'll find that one particular job would work across a number of different types of roles within that particular rule group. So if I add a job, and again, just to make it easier, and so it's all simple to see when you're using these particular rules, I'm going to add in, just call it building and construction. I'll put it in like that, just so we can see each label is slightly different. And so I've got a job name, and here is where we would add in the different items that would be applicable within that. So to do that, we really got a thing split between our job items, which we're about to add, our allowances, if we had particular allowances set up, and then it would show you any particular current charges that are linked to this rule. So any particular rate schedules that are there. So if I go add item, really what I'm going to be saying is here for day shift, I want afternoon shift, I want night shift, and then I want to say time and a half, for example, and then I want to say double time. And just for the moment we'll leave it at that. And in changing these, basically what we want to say is these three are all ordinary, and then again based on the award or EBA that you're particularly trying to put a rule in, would determine whether this is what you would enter here. But in this case, this example is anybody working would be paid 7.6 hours, to a maximum of 7.6 hours of ordinary time for either day or afternoon or night. And then after that, they'd be moving into overtime. So, for example, this particular award I'm setting up might pay 2 hours, so the next 2 hours after 7.6 of time and a half, and then the balance being overtime. And as a quick example of a typical award, that's sort of the typical structure you would have on any day, say Monday through Friday. So if I add that in like that, you'll see that we have those specific rules in there. Then, for example, we might have a scenario under this job, Saturday and Sunday are slightly different. So if I now go back into the add item and I go Saturday, and we'd go time and a half and add in that, and then go Saturday still and double time, add in that. And similarly, if we said that is overtime, and hypothetically if somebody came and worked on a Saturday, you get paid 2 hours of time and a half, and thereafter double time. So in there, so there's no maximum. If they work for the next 12 hours, it would all be double time in this example. So if I add that, and then the next day that I want to put in is Sunday. So if I just do the same sort of thing, go in here and go Sunday, and in this case, it's all double time. And I'll just hit that add button, and I'll just make it overtime. So in here. So just to recap, we originally set up a time zone, which we call build and construct, and we put in the parameters of what shift, when they would start, and the hours that they correspond to, the minimum per day, the maximum number of ordinary hours that somebody would work before they start to trigger overtime, because you will get certain scenarios where somebody might work earlier in the week, say 8 hours or 10 hours in a day, and then have a shorter day later in the week, and so they'll still be all ordinary hours. So you'd be able to build up a rule to accommodate that. The allowances work in the same way. So if I was going to add an allowance, and I won't for this particular thing, I'd put in what it's called, and then I've got flexibility around particular rules, or either it could be something like a kilometre allowance or a meal allowance that's set to when they work overtime, and you then would set a threshold for once they've worked a certain amount of ordinary hours, you then put it in, or it's an optional amount. So each of these settings, and so a lot of those are probably need assistance when you're setting those up, but they're reasonably straightforward. And again, you can set how the entry looks. In this case, I'm not going to do that. But the other thing that you can do is, once you've done a particular rule, is to test it. So for example, from that menu, if I go test timesheet, and I want to put in, let's say, a few hours in here, so I'm just going to put some example hours in here, so like that. And if we then went down to Saturday, just to do that, and make it finish there. And I could fill in the rest, but just for example, using that, when I hit submit, it will use the rules that we've set up and show you how it would be split out. So it's just saying on Monday it's calculated 7.6, and then 2 for time and a half and 0.4, and then particularly for Saturday it's put all of those 10 hours in there, and that's what it would do for a week. So you use that test to basically validate the rules that you set up, and use, a lot of people use, let's say, previous timesheets for a particular client, and check that the rule matches what they expect the timesheet to calculate. So we'll do another training video on how to set this rule against a particular rate schedule, but this gives you a quick overview on the steps that you need to set up a rule in PinvoiceR. And it's all starting with the time zone, and then you create the job group, and then set up each of those items that you need for particular days. So even in the instance that you had all flat hours, you would need to set up a rule to show everything went into a flat rate, so for each of those shifts that somebody works. So in any case that you have an online timesheet, a rule is required. I hope that will make some sense, and certainly if you have any questions, either have a look at the support documentation or chat to your contact at PinvoiceR.